Okay, can we have a big hand now, please? Welcome, Mark Savill.
Good afternoon, thanks for staying around. I realised, Chris has been waving at me already, I've got -3 minutes to talk about what's a very large topic. So I will skip through it. I'll just try and emphasise some of the main points. What I would like to start with is the portal. The portal is really the biggest innovation that's changed the way that we process injury claims, and there's been obviously one of the changes that are coming now. We're extending the portal further. Claims at the moment go up to 10,000, and there is a move now to increase vertically to include claims up to 25,000, and horizontally to include EL and PL claims. The issue I think we have with the portal is it's a very linear process, and so it has been developed so that you move through each phase step by step. And I think one of the issues we've got with reform at the moment is that any changes now are going to take quite some time to introduce. The initial introduction was not well managed. There is now a change control process that will need to be followed for the development to be introduced properly, and that's going to take some time. And a lot of the reform discussions are all aiming for a date of April 2013. And I think whatever the government expectations are, the reality of delivery of this kind of development by then is going to be quite difficult. The release 2 is where we're at the moment in terms of testing. I think that the view is that that's now going to be put on hold, and there's going to be some discussion about the vertical extension, a decision as to what that involves, and so the next version of the portal we're now going to see incorporate them all together. And I think that's going to be at least a year, but potentially 18 months further down the line. Biggest fact I think that's important in terms of understanding the portal is the dropout rate. Our stats show that around 65% of claims stay within the portal, and just that is going up. I think recently we review it on a quarterly basis. It has been coming down, but it's now starting to come back up again. And I think a lot of that is to do with resource management. We listening to the repairers talking about capacity. And I think that as the claims have been, claims frequency is reducing, the insurers are being able to get on top of claims management a little more, and so managing to keep more claims within the portal. One thing that is being discussed at the moment, and something that we're promoting, is the idea of Portal Lite, which is really, instead of trying to do what the current portal does, which is to enforce the individual rules at each stage of the process, is almost to step back and say, well, the benefit of the portal is the electronic transfer of information. Insurers and solicitors are used to dealing with rules and enforcing rules in their own systems, so why not step back from that, allow them to do that, and just use the portal as a transfer process. We are about to do some development work on the portal for the extension, and now would be a good time to try and come up with a process that delivers efficiencies but isn't so difficult to develop, isn't so difficult to change, will give us a lot more flexibility, and so we'll be able to change the rules, try different protocols, and simply look at that document and data exchange. Potentially even moving use of the portal into different areas, so looking at just general subrogated recovery claims, pushing that backwards and forwards through an electronic exchange, potentially even keeping liability disputes within the framework of the portal, which currently, as you saw earlier, drop out of the process. So there is that's the graph I was looking for. So there's capacity, I think within insurers is increasing. The claims management of those claims means that more has stayed in. Post-Christmas, our analysis does seem to be that the graph is curving upwards again. So, big topic, obviously referral fees. LASPO became an Act of Parliament on the 1st of May, so it's all happening right now, and aiming to ban referral fees. There's a lot of confusion. The government tried clearly to shoehorn this into the Act at a late stage once Jack Straw started calling us all parasites and raised the argument, and the government then had to take the initiative. Some elements have changed throughout the debate, and I think for repairers and hirers there is some confusion as to, I think you were discussing this morning, some confusion as to how far that ban might potentially extend to that area, and I think we're going to need to wait for some clarification from the enforcement agencies, as I mentioned a bit. Definitely, medical legal is one of the examples within the guidance notes. So, an instruction from a claimant solicitor to medical legal agency. Under the Act, any referral fee payment that comes back, any consideration, will be caught by that legislation. The question is, if there's an instruction from a solicitor to a repairer or a hirer, is that then encompassed within the Act or not? And I don't think there's a clear answer to that. The big impact, it does emphasise the one solution, which is alternative business structures, which I'll also come on to. So I'll stick through the law, you can read that at your leisure later. I think the big issue is really around enforcement. There is, I would say, no appetite for enforcement. This has been pushed onto the SRA, the FSA, and they've got plenty of things on their books at the moment. They don't really want to deal with this. They've had their summit meeting to look at how they're going to enforce it, and they're not clear. We've got the legislation in place now. We don't know what the implementation date is, although it's likely to be April 2013. There's a lot of work for them to do to decide how they're going to try and pick through some of the contractual arrangements and see whether arrangements are in breach of the legislation or not. I think practically we're going to see a few developments. ABS, alternative business structures, for those of you who haven't heard about it, is the ability for organisations, for legal firms to be owned by non-lawyers. That was introduced in the Legal Services Act and is now live. The SRA are working their way through the applications, and we saw the co-op law, co-op legal services receive their licence first, together with John Welsh Stammers and Lawbridge Solicitors. Since then, there have been some other organisations we've seen coming through the process, but there's still plenty there. ABS, I think, is being looked at by insurers, not just from the perspective of securing income streams in place of referral fees, but also it's really opened the doors to look at the whole area of legal services, to look at how the customer journey of policyholders can be improved, to look at other legal services that can be provided, to look at other elements of the legal supply chain, so defendant services, cost services, all of those now could well be moving into an ABS near you. So a quick pictorial explanation of what I've been talking about. Images are not intended to represent anybody. The fat cat, I'm sure you can work out, has been talked about above. We've got the insurers, and I've just picked some A's, so there's no indication whatsoever that I believe AXA are receiving, knowingly receiving referral fees. So there is a supply chain with claims moving backwards and forwards and instructions moving backwards and forwards, and referral fees moving around the system. Inevitably, if you listen to Jack Straw and the government, the referral fees has been seen as the reason that we're getting fraudulent and exaggerated claims. And the other element that's being blamed on that are the claims management companies who entered the scene when referral fees arrived. So the intention is that referral fees get banned, they fall out of the equation, anything in the supply chain moves out of the equation, and the claims management companies. But I think in terms of the frequency of claims, that's not necessarily going to be the end of the line. So we've got ABS. We're going to have ABSs run by insurers sitting in the middle of the process, and so the fact that lawyers are not necessarily going to be as in control of the legal supply chain as they are currently. But I think the big change are going to be some of the large organisations, some of the large ABSs who move into this sector. And obviously I've already mentioned the co-op. We've got Gordon and Slater from from Australia, who have been granted their licence, and obviously everybody's aware of Quindell's plans. There are going to be some large companies that are going to move in and try to control the legal process. A lot of money in terms of marketing, and so I think we are still going to see plenty of encouragement for claims despite the ban on referral fees. We just move to a different model. There are other reforms going on, different bodies, and I think that's part of the problem. We have different representative bodies who are all trying to negotiate separately with number 10. We've got Mr. Ginogli, who's been within the process for some time, slightly moving out of favour, particularly with his sniggering during the House of Lords debates on mesothelioma victims. And so Justine Greening appears to be on the scene from the Ministry of Transport. And there is a race, obviously fitting in with the theme, there's a race to reform. The ABI, just like a royal at a Jamaican Olympic event, has clearly got off the line first. They've been talking clearly to the government and have got their ear. We've also, going back to the Oxbridge boat race, we've got some people on the pitch. Whether we see some of that in the Olympics remains to be seen, but Ken Clark and Jack Straw are getting in the way of claimant lawyers and pushing them back. Ken Clark, in a number of speeches, has pretty much blamed the Law Society and legal interests in negotiating too high fees when the portal came into effect. And Jack Straw openly talks about law firms as parasites within the system. We've got the credit hire companies at the top there who've got away late. I think, again, as was being discussed earlier, they haven't really had the ear of the government actually trying to catch up and put their points of view across. And we've got the poor old claimant at the bottom, who's being lobbed paracetamols by Jack Straw, and is really losing his place within the whole debate. So, the Transport Committee report, a number of recommendations, some of them intended to really change the landscape. And the government's response came out. We were all waiting to see what the recommendations were going to be, and pretty much, you can deal with that slide, the government said, it's all in hand. You don't need to worry about it, we're doing everything. I think the key, though, then, we move on to the Insurance Summit. So, yesterday, the government had their second Insurance Summit. Just interesting, just to cast a mind back to the first Insurance Summit, where the different representative groups were divided up. The claimants appeared to have an hour in the morning, and then the insurers were invited to the top table with David Cameron to have a much more leisurely discussion. Again, quite clearly, I think, showing the different negotiating positions and strengths of the different bodies here. The second Insurance Summit took place in the Department of Transport, and the claimants weren't even invited there. It's really just a discussion with insurers as what they think should happen next. So we're definitely seeing this continuing difference in approach. With the summit, a number of new proposals coming forward. Independent medical experts, you've already heard discussed. I think that's an interesting development, and for me it almost feels like the changes in incapacity benefit, where there's now an increased requirement for medical assessment, an increased number of assessments needed in order to become eligible for those benefits. And what's happening there is the injury descriptors are slowly, the bar is slowly being raised. And so whether the intention is to move towards more of a sort of governmental panel so that they can have more control as to what is seen to be recognised as whiplash or not, I think will be interesting, and interesting to see how the debate and the consultation goes. Again, a repeated call for more evidence. How can you prove that whiplash has actually happened and that there is an injury that isn't being either made up or exaggerated? And I'm pleased to see all the references to the Lyons Davidson conference last week. The scientific evidence put forward there some of it was absolutely fascinating. And we are submitting that to the government to hope that part of that debate is widened to take that into account. The potential speed minimum, again, I think is something that's very interesting. It's something that Jack Straw has been pushing. It's something that the ABI have been promoting very strongly. Interestingly, Mr. Giannogli appeared to step back from that on Tuesday and started saying that actually, whilst they want to look at further evidence, they don't necessarily feel that accepting a minimum threshold of speed is something that they're going to pursue. So we'll see where that one develops. But I think the key, which has come out of nowhere, it's arrived in the Times in an interview on Sunday, is the increase in the personal injury small claims limit, which could completely throw all of the arguments about portal fees out of the window. It completely could change the whole debate about how whiplash claims are brought about. We don't know really what the government is talking about when they say we're going to increase the small claims limit, as to how that fits in with the rest of the process. But effectively it could replace a whole chunk of the portal process, take that out, and with the small claims limit up until issue of proceedings, there'd be no costs available for settled claims. In which case, then we need to look at other processes for injured parties to obtain compensation. So looking at damage-based agreement is also within the Act, and looking at before the event insurance, legal expense insurance, might come much more strongly back into the whole debate as a result of this. So we're all now waiting to see whether this is a real attempt to change the process, or whether it's merely a negotiating position to drive what's current, which is the negotiation on portal fees. So we'll wait and see on that one. Portal fees, just to quickly run through, currently £1,200. April saying we're not playing. We don't want to get involved in a bartering situation. It's really, you need to have a look at proper evidence. The Guardian law is the figure that I find most interesting. Neil Rose from Legal Futures, who does seem to have a good grasp of what's going on in the industry, put the figure on the line in a Guardian article, £800. So it'll be interesting to see whether he's right or whether he's just made a stab. The government at the first insurance summit, where they did the math, 800 quid for referral fees, you take that off 1,200, brings you down to 400. So that's their starting point. The ABI, and if you saw the quote leaked unquote email from the ABI, that came out on Monday in advance of the summit, with claims bringing it down to £350 on some hard evidence that they've calculated using some higher salaries. But if you replace those doing the claims with paralegals and reduce the salary cost within that process, it comes down to 150 quid. So this is really, I think, what's going to determine what happens with whiplash claims. All of the government proposals at the end of the day, even the referral fee ban is not necessarily going to change the landscape. It's all down to how much fat there is in the process, how much margin there is, And really, this is the debate that we should have been having a year ago, which probably would have sorted out a lot of these issues now. So I think how that ties in with the small claims limit change will be the most interesting. And so really then, just to wrap up, just a couple of ideas. So I think really we've got to take the heat out by a change in costs. I think refocus on the customer. I think the injured party is not a parasite. There clearly are some exaggerated claims, and there clearly are some fraudulent claims, but what we should be doing is concentrating on that and accepting that individuals in accident have had an injury and deserve some compensation, and really focusing on their needs and moving that forward as part of the debate. There are all kinds of different ideas around the market at the moment. One that's being pushed is the idea of a pre-portal process where rehabilitation is moved to the front of the process. This is something that BICMA are putting forward, where there's an initial triage, some treatment, and then we move towards a report and a compensation at that stage. And the other element that seems to have been lost in all of the debate is the Jackson tariff. At the lower end, it wouldn't be difficult to introduce a tariff to say, this is the injury, this is the compensation, and streamline the whole process. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes, and possibly the legal process will become more of a limited area in what's left. But I think so the debate really will focus around the level of legal costs, and we'll see how that comes out over the next 2 to 3 months. So thank you very much. I hope I didn't take up too much time, and I'll give you an overview of where we're at.
Great summary, big hand.